Sometimes you'll just read a show's premise and completely write it off from the get-go because it sounds so silly or absurd, or perhaps both. This was how I, and I know a lot of other people, reacted when they first heard about the 100 Girlfriends Who, and count them with me, really, 5 reallys, love you. A title that makes it sound incredibly cringy. The type of harem show that just jumps the shark, that's gone too far, so above and beyond the kind of degeneracy that we have seen in the past from anime. That is the impression a title like that gives off. And yet it somehow works. A show like this should not work, period. It should not. It really shouldn't. Even if you dig a little deeper and read the premise, it still should not work. A show where our main character ends up with, eventually, 100 girlfriends, 100 individual soulmates, 100 characters who have to fall in love with this guy. It does not make sense that it would work. It sounds like something that should fall flat on its face immediately. And yet it works. Somehow, despite all logic, it works. So how exactly does a show like this work? How does a show where the main guy ends up with 100 girlfriends work out? Well, partly because we're only dealing with 6 girlfriends in the initial first season that exists right now, although according to the creator of the original source material, eventually there will be 100 girls. He's not going to skip over any, so that will be quite the marvel to see when this presumably very long journey finally comes to an end. But even still, how does having 6 girls introduced in only 12 episodes work? Because that shouldn't either. Each one of them getting, on average 2 episodes apiece. How could it manage to make all these characters feel in any way justified in their romances when it needs to get through so many of them so quickly? And part of the answer is that, well, not every one of these girls is fully fleshed out, right? And ultimately, that's kind of to be expected. But they get a hell of a lot more than I ever would have expected them to, especially when most of them do follow that 2-episode example. One where they get introduced and end up in that relationship with the main character, and then another episode where they are integrated into the group with all of the other members of this family, so to speak. And then after that point, they are around, they are a part of the group shenanigans, and they do manage to give them enough individual focus during those episodes where new girls are being integrated into the group that I think it does enough to make you like these characters, despite the fact that, they don't get as much screen time as obviously they would if it was more spread out or there weren't, 100 girlfriends to eventually get through. Nevertheless, the show manages to do enough to make you care about these characters and find them enjoyable and entertaining when it really shouldn't be able to pull that off. Another thing it's somehow able to pull off is making the romances for the most part feel fairly justified. Now, of course, you have to accept some absurdity. And with a premise like this, yes, the absurdity is still there, and I'm not going to try and tell you that it's not there at all. But even with a short amount of time to introduce these characters and integrate them into the group, even with the premise that as soon as our main guy and a new girl who is going to be one of his 100 soulmates meet, they're going to immediately fall in love. It still works. It still works somehow. And I think a lot of that is just the charm that these characters have. And even the main guy. Normally a character like that who is not just 2-timing or 3-timing, but eventually 100-timing these characters. Normally that would not work. Normally a character like that would be a scumbag. And that's what's happened a lot of the time when anime tries to pull this off in the past. But they managed to make it work because this guy is written in a way that obviously is very above and beyond what someone would normally be expected to be capable of. But because this guy has been rejected 100 times before getting all these soulmates, he has it within him to love every single one of them equally. And he proves it time and time again. Even as new girls get introduced, he still shows consistently his love for all of his already existing girlfriends. He is a mega Chad. He is able to make it work. And all of that results in this show that is very surprisingly but genuinely wholesome and heartwarming. As all of these characters come together to basically form this little family, it really is genuinely really sweet and touching. And you would never have expected that from a premise like this. And this is coming from someone who has enjoyed plenty of harem anime in the past. I don't look at a show being a harem and immediately write it off. It can definitely be really enjoyable and heartwarming depending on how it's handled. But obviously there are a lot of tropes that do get difficult to watch the more and more they are brought up, especially when you go back and watch older harem anime. I do cringe when I see titles like this and premises like this that make it just seem like it's going to be super degenerate. And how could you think otherwise with a title like 100 Girlfriends? And look, I'm not going to convince someone who absolutely hates harem anime that this is going to make them love the show. But if you're someone who has enjoyed them in the past, who is open to liking them, you should watch this show, because it's much more enjoyable than I ever would have thought it would be, and much more enjoyable than I know a lot of people ever thought it would be. This show has no right being as good as it is. It has no right having such likable characters, such heartwarming moments, such somehow believable romances, despite the fact that it's cramming 6 of them into a 12-episode anime. Somehow it works out. And a lot of that goes to the care that this creator seems to have really put into this premise, and the focus on making this a charming, feel-good show rather than just being what you would kind of expect of a really generic kind of harem anime. This tries to avoid a lot of those tropes that people have gotten tired of. That's not to say they aren't there. That's not to say it gets rid of them. In fact, when it does include them, it feels like it's genuinely having fun with it. And that's a good sign of when something truly has care put into it. When it takes these sort of expected tropes, is able to make fun of them, but still show that it values where it came from and can enjoy those tropes and not necessarily feel embarrassed by them. It adds a certain flair to it that lets it exceed what it otherwise would have been capable of if it was just played straight, or if it was trying to go in the opposite direction and completely ignore those kinds of tropes. It strikes a really good balance. In the end, I had a lot of fun with this show, much more than I ever thought I would. And I would say to anyone who is turned off by the premise, by the title even, give it a chance. Unless you completely are against the idea of a harem anime, I would check this out, because this is so much better than it has any right to be. And I am genuinely looking forward to the already announced season 2, seeing what the, I guess, 4 or 5 new characters we'll get in that will be up to. And genuinely, I'm really curious to see how the madman making this story is going to be able to pull off 100 distinct girlfriends by the end of it. You know, it's one thing to do 6, it's one thing to even do 10 or 20, but 100, I really am interested to see, however many years down the line, what this looks like when it's done. And God knows how many seasons it's going to be by the time that ends up happening. But hey, you know what? I'll be along for the ride, because this really did impress me, and I hope it does so for you too. At the very least, I think you'll be able to appreciate the moments where these characters just act like a family and have fun and appreciate each other's company. And oh my God, what if the polygamists were right? On that note, thank you for watching. As always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care everyone. Look forward to the next video.